Hello again. The message today is about Ezekiel's battle, but not all of Ezekiel's battle. We're going to focus on a particular characteristic. We're going to try to fit Ezekiel's battle into the time frame of all the other prophecies that we have and understand where they go in time. That turns out not to be an easy thing. So Ezekiel's battle in time is the topic here. And Ezekiel's battle, probably you know, it's one of the well-known prophecy parts, is Ezekiel chapters 38 through 39. And these describe an attack on Israel that is thwarted by God. And that is God's purpose in this, as we will see. He wants the whole world to see that he has stepped in here. And so those two chapters, 38 and 39, are full of all sorts of details we're not going to go into here. We're only going to look at bits and pieces of them to try to understand where they can fit into prophecy in time, where they go along with other prophecies. And there are different views on this because people have had trouble fitting Ezekiel's battle in. Some people think that Ezekiel's battle comes at the end of the millennial period. Other people think that it is actually just the Battle of Armageddon described in a different way. And so to find this information, we're going to look near the beginning and the end of those chapters. Those are going to show us characteristics of Israel at the time that this battle happens, and that will help us to understand when it happens. And we're also going to look at the end of those chapters because that tells us some more about what's going to come afterward. And that gives us gives us some more information about when in time this is going to happen. Okay, so Ezekiel starts, or at least where we're going to start, is God is instructing Gog to prepare an invasion force. And it says, this is Ezekiel 38, 7 through 8. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. After many days, you will be called to arms. In future years, you will invade a land. And this verse continues on, but I'm going to break it in there. So these verses are calling Gog to build up relationships with these countries, and they were listed previously in Ezekiel. We're not going to go through that list. But those countries were listed there, and this is part of a horde that is an invasion force that is going to come into Israel and try to conquer Israel. And so Gog has to begin setting up these relationships so that at the point in time where he is ready for it, he can take command of the forces of those countries and drive them into Israel to try to invade and conquer Israel. And this is and you can see from this is a calculated, planned objective. This isn't spur of the moment. This is something that Gog is going to have to do over many years, and that it repeats that as many days and many years. And so it's something that is all cold calculated and planned, and we know that to be part of a lot of Israel's enemies right now, as a lot of them are looking for that opportunity to strike. So next Ezekiel continues on in that verse that I split and describes the people and the land that are going to be invaded. And it says, "You will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety." So there's a whole pile of things that are characteristics of Israel at that time that are going to give us some information here. And this is the immediate history of Israel. This is saying the people that Gog is going to be invading, the land that they're invading, is populated with people who had all of these characteristics. They were recovered from war. Okay, so they had been through a war, and this once we understand all these characteristics together, it'll be more obvious. But I'll tell you right now, this is a reference to the death camps and all of the things that happened to Israel during World War II. As we go through this, as I said, you'll understand more and be able to put that piece together. Gathered from many nations. So these people had been outside of the state of Israel. They were all gathered together to make the nation of Israel. And we know that that's how Israel was created. Israel simply didn't exist as a nation or even as a people until the early 60s, the 1960s. And so Israel was created from the people who left the nations behind. And Israel had been, if you remember, they'd been driven out into the nations because they had killed their Messiah. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later on too here. So God is behind all of this. God was the one who drove them out of Israel, and now he's the one who's bringing them back into Israel. and they've come in a small amount, and later they're going to come in a big amount. So it also says the mountains had long been desolate. Now that's a really good one. That's really saying that the land of Israel had been desolate. There were no people there. And we know that to be a fact. And until Israel was created, there were just a few people there. You wouldn't ever call them enough to inhabit the land. There were just odds and ends, people who had never, some who had never left. Although most of them had been driven out of Israel, there were still a few who stayed in and populated Israel, some Jews. And there were a few people who had come back in bits and pieces, but there was basically no real population of Israel. There was no nation of Israel. It was just a bunch of people who lived there. And so it had been desolate, and for nearly 2,000 years, for a big chunk of 2,000 years, from the time that they had been driven out until Israel as a nation was created. And so the next thing it says is live in safety. So these people now, all of them live in safety. And again, that's a reference back to World War II when they lived among the nations, but they were not safe. And we know all of what Hitler did to them and all of that story. And so that's a reference back to that. So we see a lot of World War II references here and what happened after World War II to build Israel. And so that gives us a position in time is that the most recent event in their history, most significant event in their immediate history, has been that they came from World War II and all the things that happened there. So that gives us some information we can use to locate this in time now. So altogether, this verse and all of the things that we saw there describe post-war II, World War II Israel. And that's an important thing to understand, as I said before, because this is all God at work here. In Ezekiel 39:23, which is the next chapter, it talks about that. It says, and the nations will know that the people of Israel went into exile for their sin because they were unfaithful to me. So this tells us again what we already have figured out, that this is the return from the exile that God sent them into because they killed their own Messiah and repented of nothing. And so that is the whole understanding here. That's the idea of how these people came to be. They are the ones who were sent out because of that, and now they're the ones that God is bringing back. So we can locate this in time, as I said now, because we have this information. At the beginning of the sixth trumpet, the beast attacks Jerusalem and conquers all of Israel. That's one of the big events in the sixth trumpet. And so what happens after that is for 3.5 years, the beast is in control of Jerusalem and Israel, and it's a populated place with lots of people. And at the end of that 3.5 years, Jesus returns and takes over Israel and the world, and the millennial period begins, a 1,000-year period begins, and during that period, Israel is populated. So Israel is never desolate after that point. So from the time that the beast attacks Jerusalem, and even before it, Israel is never desolate. And so you can't say that the beast attack happened before Ezekiel's battle, or else Israel would be described differently in Ezekiel, because Ezekiel says the mountains had been long desolate. Well, that's simply not the case now, and never will be again. And so it also would be bizarre to describe the beginnings of Israel when something later in their history, the slaughter and the captivity of the beast attack, had happened more recently. You wouldn't do that when you're talking about why a people were there. And we know what happens with the beast attack is that he almost depopulates Israel of Jewish people. Those who aren't killed are captive, or they manage to escape and for a period of time. And so it would be a very different thing if you were in Ezekiel, and Ezekiel was coming after that beast attack. And so it doesn't make any sense there either. So the beast attack has to happen after Ezekiel's battle. Okay, now the verses continue, and they describe even more about the land and the people that are going to be invaded. It says, you will say, now this is Gog, you will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. Now this tells us a whole bunch more again. it says that Israel is resettled ruins, and that takes us back to exactly what we were saying. These are people who had come back into their country and found it a ruin and began rebuilding it and have been rebuilding it in our time. And Israel is looking pretty good right now. It's exactly the kind of place you would want to conquer because they are rich. And we also saw the message gathered from the nations again, which is really a repeat of what we saw before. These are the people who were gathered from the nations and brought to Israel. So rich, yes, Israel is rich. Israel is now a high-tech country. They're modern in every way. They are blessed by God. You simply can't ignore that fact. And they would be a good target if you wanted to conquer somebody in the Middle East because they've got wealth and power and technology and all sorts of good things. And so that's also true even in our time. And it talks about them also being peaceful. And Israel is that. Israel is not aggressive towards neighboring countries. It only defends itself against the attacks. In fact, it is a peacemaker. In our time here that I speak, the Abraham Accords are an effort by Israel to try to bring peace into that region. And so peaceful is also a current description of how you would describe Israel. And unsuspecting of this attack. And so that tells us something too, is that this attack is going to come upon these people when they are not expecting it to happen. And the other thing, and maybe one of the most important things here, is it says these people are living without walls or gates or bars. Now, walls were things that were kept around cities to keep out people. And the walls had gaps in them where people could go through, and those had gates in them and bars on the gates to keep people out so that you could lock people out, and so the gate would effectively become part of the wall when you closed it off. And so that's how they protected cities back then. We don't do that now anymore because we have weapons that can easily pound through a wall or a gate, and so you wouldn't do it that way anymore. But the imagery is important because it to anyone in Ezekiel's time, that would make entirely sense to say that it doesn't have protection. All of the protection for a city came from its walls and its heavy gates and the bars that locked the gates into the walls. And so if you say a city doesn't have walls or gates or bars, you're saying it's an unprotected city. And it says all of those cities, all these unwalled villages have no protection. And so it really is saying Israel is unprotected. And that's a bizarre thought in our time. We can't imagine Israel being unprotected. Right now, they're a significant military force. So how is it possible that they would suddenly be unprotected? Well, that's a question we can't address today. And it's one that's difficult to address looking at things from our current time. So again, we've gotten some more information. We can put that to use in helping us locate this battle in with the other things in prophecy. And as I said before, no one right now would refer to Israel as unprotected. That just wouldn't make sense. They are easily able to put down any kind of invasion force that comes into them. And this invasion force is kind of a ragtag Muslim force. It doesn't appear to be that strong. And so Israel wouldn't normally have a problem with that. And so we know that something must change. And Israel currently is battle ready for that kind of an invasion because they have had invasions like that recently. And it's almost an annual thing that they have in smaller versions of these attacks where people try to invade Israel. So it's just hard for us to imagine this time that you would ever consider Israel to be unprotected and unable to keep out in an invasion force like that. So something must change between now and then. So we know that this is a little bit in our future. We don't know exactly what is going to change to make this happen. And so we know that this does help us locate it because it's not exactly in our time. Something significant has to change that Israel becomes unprotected. So it's definitely after our time, but we've talked before already that it has to come before the sixth trumpet. So we've kind of narrowed the time boundaries down a little bit and understand better where it fits in. Okay, next we'll look at God's purpose in all of this. This battle of Ezekiel is not done without God's involvement. God has a plan here. And he gives out that plan in many places, and we're going to look at two of them here. The first one comes from Ezekiel 38, verse 16, and it says, O God, O Gog, I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. What he's saying there is God is going to use Gog to show himself holy to all of the nations of the world. And this is important to understand because people after this time are going to know there is a God, and not just that there is a God that who exists, that he is also the protector of Israel as he was in the past. And so that's key. We'll see that over and over again. And so after the return of Jesus, there will never be any doubt again that God exists because Jesus will be here on earth. And so even now with this battle, it becomes very plain that there is a God. People can't deny it because of what happens in this battle. And just in short form, what happens in this battle is this invasion force, a huge earthquake strikes, and the mountains of Israel, it says they turn over. That really means they're flattened to the ground, and fire rains down on the people and destroys all the attacking force. And so we'll see how that fits into prophecy later on as well. And so from this time forward, there won't be any doubt in anyone's mind that there is a God. And that's key to understanding end times. So another example of this same idea being that we saw before in the other verse is I'm doing this to show myself holy, to show the nations, in fact, that I am holy. We see it now in Ezekiel again, 39:7. I will make known my holy name among my people Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned, and the nations will know that I, the Lord, am the Holy One in Israel. And so from this point forward, everybody is going to know there is a God, and he is the protector of Israel. So this future of Israel is discussed at the end of chapter 39, and this is after the battle has happened and the forces have been destroyed and the cleanup is done. God begins to talk about what's going to happen in the future, and it's important for us to understand that because that gives us again some more context we can use to place this in a time. And the verse says, or the verses say, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I will now bring Jacob back from captivity, and will have compassion on all the people of Israel. When I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies, I will show myself holy through them in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. For though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind. So there's a whole bunch of things there. And one that I want to focus on is the repeating idea of I sent them away. Some of the people returned to Israel. They were attacked in this attack, and now everyone is going to return. So we're going to see a massive influx into Israel of all of the people in the nations who are Jews. And I believe with that, we're going to see Israel shut down and not allow non-Jewish people in there again. And so it will return essentially to what it was prior to being sent out into the nations after they had let the Messiah be killed. So this is the whole plan. God says, I sent them away, some returned, now all will return. And the other thing that's really important in here is the countries of their enemies. And this may indicate more than just the few nations that were listed at the start. Ezekiel begins by listing a bunch of nations that are part of this horde, as it's called. And so these nations are certainly involved in the direct part of the attack. But the countries of their enemies and not leaving any behind seems to indicate that people are going to leave all of the countries where they currently reside, even the ones who didn't participate directly in this. So no longer will there be any Jews in any other countries other than Israel. So now we can kind of put all the pieces together here and say, where does it fit into prophecy? And so clearly we've already established, and there's even more evidence that we can bring to establish it, that Ezekiel's battle cannot occur anytime after Jesus returns. You simply can't have the conditions there that are talked about in Ezekiel. And it cannot be the Armageddon battle. And remember, there are some people who think that this is just another description of the Battle of Armageddon, but it isn't. It's very different, and you can even go through the details of that battle versus this. And I have a video on this that I think is really good and would make it clear that it's very different and not at all the same battle. And so it cannot be the Armageddon battle. It comes before the sixth trumpet, and the Armageddon battle comes after the seventh trumpet. So there's a whole bunch of reasons to be quite certain that it isn't the Armageddon battle, and it is not a battle that happens at the end of the millennium. And so we have that much. It can't be back there, so it has to be earlier in the chronology of the trumpets and seals. And the only earthquake that we see there, it comes before the sixth trumpet, because that's our kind of marker. We know that it can't come after the sixth trumpet. And so the only earthquake that is mentioned that comes before the sixth trumpet occurs in the sixth seal. Okay, and that from Revelation 6 verses 12 to 13 says, and I saw when he opened the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun was blackened like sackcloth of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the heavens fell upon the earth, like a fig tree casting its figs when it is shaken by a strong wind. Okay, that reference there to the stars of the heavens falling on earth is almost certainly the fire falling on the forces that had invaded Israel. So that lines up, and Ezekiel must be that battle. Ezekiel's battle lines up with that chronologically. It's after our time, but before the sixth trumpet, and that's the only earthquake that we have in that period. And so that makes it not just another earthquake, another battle, but it is really the kickoff event for the end times. This is really the one where things change. We go from the old world to the new world, and in the new world, everybody knows that there's a God because they saw what God did for Israel. God, when Israel was unprotected and invaded, God stepped in, and by only God's hand were the enemies of Israel destroyed. So it's an undeniable knowledge that everyone has. They all sit back and say, whoa, whoa, that was God doing that. There is a God. And so that's the new world thinking that happens at that time. And this is really the kickoff for the end of the end times. From that point on, we move forward into the trumpets and then right to the end, seventh trumpet.